It's time for the 1430 Connection on 1430 WNAV and 99.9 FM, spotlighting news, newsmakers, and important community issues. Now, with this week's edition of the 1430 Connection, here is WNAV news anchor Donna Cole.
Welcome to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Brian Holtslander, firefighter paramedic here in Anne Arundel County. Brian, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to read a Facebook post on September 24th that the Housing Authority of the City of Annapolis shared. It was a Facebook post for a ribbon cutting for a new little library in the Robinwood community, and they wrote, "It's amazing what happens when the community comes together for the good of our children." It showed a little library full of books and with children gathered around it. On the same day, you reshared that post, Brian, and you wrote, "Thank you to LO 1563, which refers to International Association of Firefighters, Local 1563, Anne Arundel County Fire Department in HACA, and most of all, the kids of Annapolis's Robinwood neighborhood for an inspiring literacy event. While I am disappointed that I could not attend due to my lingering illness, I am proud of all of you and look forward to see you all again soon. Solidarity." And Brian, your union president, Joe Adavinola, commented on that post. He wrote, "Brother Brian, thank you for all of your hard work organizing and making the right connections to enhance youth literature and taking your time to make all of these newspaper boxes presentable to the community we serve. I cannot thank you enough for taking pride in both our union and the community. You are a true hero." So, Brian, what did you think of that comment coming from your union president?
Well, I have the privilege of counting Joe as one of my best friends too. So obviously that means an incredible, great deal from him. And like I said, while it was disappointing to not be able to be a part of it, to be part of our organization, our union, which is so committed to giving back to the community, both on and off duty. I was just really proud that everyone could pull it off. It's actually the continuation of an initiative that we started a number of years ago, initially with the Maryland Family Network, and I'm proud to say that we've placed, this is our second little library, and through firefighter book drives with Maryland Family Network in Shadyside, Annapolis, over 1,000 books into the hands of local Anne Arundel students and children.
That's amazing. That truly is amazing. And when I made this appointment with you for this interview, you had given some credit to your wife.
Yeah, you know, kind of a weird or maybe a different thing for firefighters to be involved in maybe at first glance, but to me it made perfect sense. My wife has a degree in child development and is one of the smartest and most compassionate people that I've ever met. And she has the distinction or lack thereof of being the sounding board of some of the things that I come home with. And, you know, especially early in your career, you reach a point where you have to decide on how you're going to continue to proceed, either with pessimism and maybe some futility after going to the same tragic things over and over again with seemingly almost the same people, or you can double down and really look for solutions. And through talking with her, we really believe in early childhood education and bringing families together around a good book. And it's a small thing, but if that provides some sort of foundation for these kids to grow up with, to be productive and fulfilled, you know, within our community, then it's worth every effort.
I think that's incredibly heroic, and I just thank you to both of you and to everybody that's made it happen, because these are our communities. Brian, so to get back to that last sentence in that Facebook post and something that people are hearing in this interview, you wrote, "While I am disappointed that I could not attend due to my lingering illness." Let's talk about that lingering illness, because sometimes when you call somebody for news-related something or other, or for booking an interview about books, it turns into another story altogether. And this is what happened with this interview. Can you tell me about that lingering illness that you have and that we're hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, I'm happy to report that I'm doing much better. And I was diagnosed with COVID a couple weeks ago. Most likely from my duties, either on the ambulance or as a nurse, which I also serve as a part-time nurse. I had the initial diagnosis and progressed through a number of symptoms. While I would say a bit serious and unfortunate, I was certainly, probably in the middle of the spectrum, and I certainly don't want to make light of what other people, have gone through. In the first couple of months of the pandemic on the ambulance, I know that we saw some pretty tragic things. While our call volume went down as an aggregate, the amount of cardiac arrests and resuscitation attempts and deaths that we were involved with went up exponentially. We were sometimes doing a couple cardiac arrests before lunch, and those are the people those are the stories that are really the important ones.
Brian, were they related to COVID, or is this just?
That was the tricky part about the early part of the pandemic. If you remember, there weren't enough tests for live people, so there certainly weren't ones for the ones that we were working on in the houses, and so we really never knew from person to person, from emergency to emergency, who had COVID and who didn't. You certainly learn what COVID looks like. It has a distinct presentation, and after a couple of months of it, we could pretty accurately pick out who we had a pretty strong suspicion of. But initially, it really was kind of flying by the seat of our pants.
Let's take a short break. We'll be right back on the 1430 Connection. Welcome back to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole. Today I have the pleasure of talking to Firefighter Paramedic Brian Holtslander, who is fortunately doing much better than he was a few weeks ago. He's recovering from COVID. Brian, we just talked about the first few weeks when this just hit Maryland, going back to March, with not really knowing what COVID looked like when you were responding to calls out in the field. You also mentioned that you are a nurse and you work at a facility not in Maryland, yes?
Yeah, that's correct. I actually work with skilled nursing and rehab, so a little bit in layman's terms, a nursing home, but that doesn't really do it justice in the modern times. We take care of a lot of pretty acute people, which would have probably been, ICU 10, 20 years ago. And yeah, I'm privileged to work there with some amazing colleagues, and then had the unfortunate occasion of experiencing an outbreak at that facility that really gave me an even greater appreciation of this virus and its effect. In the course of a week or two, we basically had an entire washover of our patient population and knocked out virtually all of our staff, including me. And I'm a supervisor, and I take my responsibilities there and my leadership of my team and their safety very seriously. And to get knocked out kind of right when we were in the middle of the fight was a real disappointment to have to be on the sidelines for that.
I'm sorry, and I hope that when you say wiped out, that doesn't mean everyone died.
No, certainly there have been some of those, but as far as our staff members, everyone is pulling through, but there have been hospitalizations, and it's like I said, I've been in the healthcare field for over 16 years, and been through flu epidemics and other things, but this is a different animal. And for people like us in the field that are sophisticated in our PPE and our knowledge of disease transmission, and who really do everything correctly to still be so vulnerable, like I said, it really gives me an appreciation that I didn't have before, having succumbed to it. And I hope that informs my treatment interaction with my patients moving forward. I can better appreciate what they're going through. And then the road back, I still have symptoms. I still have a dysfunctional sense of taste and smell, which is different than when people say I lost my taste, sense, and smell. It's like not like a stuffy nose. It's I have virtually no sensation of taste or smell, to the point where I almost I had stuff in the oven the other day, and I didn't realize it till there was smoke coming out of it, because I had no conception of an odor of like burning broccoli, which is a pretty bad thing.
Yeah, especially for a firefighter, right?
Yeah.
So what do you say to the people that are downplaying it, that don't believe in masks?
I always had, I feel like, a pretty realistic appreciation of the disease and a sincere desire to, one, keep myself safe and not have to go through with what I was seeing, and two, to protect, my family. Having gone through it, I think just reinforces that. And if there's one thing that I've learned through this process, is that it's so worth it to do the little things to keep each other safe. There's so many that are just an inconvenience, so the wearing a mask, the social distance, to just politely adhere to the rules that businesses and establishments are doing their very best to try to accommodate with, because it is such a small price to pay compared to how sick you can possibly be. Again, there's a spectrum, but also the isolation and the predicament you'll put in your family from. I mean, my wife and kid, as soon as I started having symptoms and got a positive result because I was getting battery tested, they had to leave and go back to Michigan, where they had access to a house to isolate at, and then I didn't see them for 2 weeks. I was completely on my own. I had no contact with the outside world, and I was just going through a difficult time. And I know it was hard on them, because I know there's nothing more than they wanted to do than to help me. So, yeah, wearing a mask and standing 6 feet apart is a small price to pay.
It is a small price to pay. Now, you are feeling better. The cough is lingering. You're no longer contagious, right?
Yep, I finally met the CDC guidelines pretty much, Friday and this weekend, which is, 10 days in a resolution or improvement of symptoms and an absence of fever. But that was what was unique about my case that made getting back so difficult, is that respiratory I did pretty well, but I had intense and incredible fevers that would just crush me every night. And with each night of fevers, it kept pushing back my return date until I could get those under control, which really was a challenge.
So are you cleared to go back now?
Yeah, I am good. And actually, this will be my wife's first time back in the house today. We gave it an extra day just to make sure. And I'm feeling better. So I've spent the entire day cleaning and disinfecting and just doing the greatest due diligence that I possibly can to make sure it's okay. But again, that's something that I think is underappreciated, that it is a heck of a thing to suddenly become, in the course of a moment, dangerous to the people you care about most. And all you want to do is keep them safe. And, that worry on top of everything else that you're beginning to go through is really an emotional and psychological challenge.
I would guess, especially for someone that devotes his life to helping others. Let's take another short break. We'll be right back on the 1430 Connection. Welcome back to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole. Today I'm speaking with Brian Holtslander. He's a firefighter paramedic here in Anne Arundel County, definitely involved with our local 1563, the International Association of Firefighters, representing nearly 900 Anne Arundel County professional firefighters. And you have recently been called a true hero by your union president and good friend Joe out of Vanola for your work outside of the fire department with setting up these little libraries for communities around Anne Arundel County and recovering from coronavirus. So, Brian, let's take us through what coronavirus feels like, still continues through. You said as a paramedic early on, you didn't know what it looked like. No one knew what it looked like. Now you do. What does it look like for a paramedic responding? What are the outward signs of it?
The most unique thing that I can say about it is that we have a pretty routine device that we use when we take vital signs that measures pulse oximetry, or basically the concentration of oxygen in your blood. And it does it through a little infrared light that goes on your finger. Anyone who's had a checkup has probably had them clip that little thing in your finger.
Right. Sometimes when it's good, it's 99, 100%, right?
Exactly. And that's very typical of a healthy person. And usually there is a spectrum of attributes as you go down that ladder that you'll begin to pick up. As you get into the low 90s, You might think of a person who's maybe been a lifelong smoker and has emphysema, a little bit of pursed lip breathing, a little bit of effort, but they're okay. They can talk to you and so forth. As you dip below 90, you begin to exhibit maybe a little bit more air hunger. And as you get into the lower 80s, you'll see people like, gripping the side of their chair or the side of the stretcher and pushing their body forward and just doing everything they can to try to get oxygen in their lungs, and then, further down the spectrum. What was unique about COVID, and one of its characteristics as a diffuse respiratory pneumonia, which is the most lethal presentation that you can go through with it, which fortunately I did not have. You would get people that would, you'd be talking to them, and you'd slip a little device on their finger, and that would be in the 80s. And you kind of scratch your head because, and it's not beyond the possibility that device can now function. And so the first couple of weeks, you're thinking, boy, these pulse ox doesn't seem to be working like it's supposed to, because that person, they should be a lot more air hungry. They should be a lot more desperate. And they're not. They're pretty good. And again, because of the diffuse nature of COVID, a lot of times people would be in more respiratory distress than they would recognize. And that's how the cheese could start to slide off the cracker for them rather quickly. When you hear about decompensation and people, going in to the hospital in the morning, talking to you, and then, we check up on them later in the evening and they're on a ventilator, and then maybe the next day or the next couple of days they've expired. And that's what I think was so difficult with COVID, is that it could get ahead of people before they realized how sick they really were.
And before the paramedics realized what they had. Yeah, that's scary. That's really scary. What was your reading?
Again, I count myself very fortunate. I had respiratory symptoms for, say, the first 3 days of just intense congestion and cough, and I was still my saturations were still good in the high 90s. And then that actually remarkably just kind of alleviated. Those symptoms improved and almost went away. The congestion almost went away, but the coughing was still there. But then I would just have these bitter fevers to the point where, my biggest thing was I was worried about my kidneys and my fluid intake, because the fevers would come on usually every night pretty consistently around 7 o'clock, and they would just take everything out of my body. I was to the point where I was just laying down towels on the bed and changing those towels 3-4 times a night as I saturated them, because the virus just pushed every ounce of fluid out of my body through the fever. And then remarkably, and then at the same time you're pounding your kidneys with ibuprofen, and acetaminophen, which is, your treatment for something like that. And then they'd let go about 6 a.m, for no good reason. And then you spend the rest of the day trying to just rehabilitate your fluid intake and get ready for the next night. And I had 9-10 nights straight of that. And that's what really did not allow me to recover as well as quickly as I would have liked.
Obviously, there's a toll on the lungs with COVID. We know about that. You've already explained it. You are coughing still. You're holding some of the coughs in, and then when we take these breaks, you're letting them go. But the toll on the lungs is for real, and you are going back into firefighting within this week or next week. Does that scare you at all?
Yeah, it's a good question and a good point. I will be on the fire engine this week. I am not particularly concerned about my ability to use my respirator and my lungs per se, but I can tell you that there's some anxiety that goes with being out for a number of weeks. And, my biggest anxiety is just I want to be the best I can be for the guys next to me. And I've done everything I can to build up my strength and to get back, and I feel confident in that. But anytime you've been away from a job like being a firefighter, where it is a lot of muscle memory, it is a lot of training, just like an athlete, and your responsibilities are incredible to the people around you, I think you'd be naive or foolish to not really have a good self-assessment and really want to serve at the very pinnacle of your ability.
Understood. Brian, thank you for doing everything that you do as a firefighter, as a paramedic, what you've done with these little libraries.
Thank you. And if I could plug a little bit, we're looking at doing an initiative with the libraries. I have a number of them ready to go. If anyone in the community is interested in having one of those, and the pictures can be found on our Facebook page for Anne Arundel County Professional Firefighters, please don't hesitate to send us a message or an email, and it would be our privilege to be part of your neighborhood and part of your community. And like I said, we have plenty ready to go. I've worked all summer painting them and decaling them. and we just need some homes.
All right. Brian, thanks for taking the time to join me today and keep doing as well as you've been doing lately.
Again, thank you for the opportunity, Donna, and thank you for all you do.
This is Donna Cole on the 1430 Connection. We will see you next week.